Last week on Saturday Night Live, Michael Che referred to Caitlyn Jenner as a fella who used to be named Bruce Jenner. And this resulted in all of your typical woke outrage. People wrote about it, well, people.com wrote about it, and tons of other people actually wrote about it. Now, what do you think would happen if someone on SNL made an offensive joke? Why? I'd imagine there'd be an apology of some sort, saying it was a passive comment, we didn't understand, we're so sorry we hurt anybody. That didn't happen. You know what actually happened? Michael Che, again, this week, basically doubled down, making an even more offensive joke, and then going on to say that NBC didn't want him to make these following jokes, and then said even more offensive things. And sure enough, people are outraged. But guess what? Nothing's happening. Not too long ago, I made a video about this, maybe last week. Barack Obama said that woke cancel culture and these purity tests, it's not activism. And there were actually people left and right, surprisingly the left, agreeing this woke cancel culture stuff, it's not doing anything. We've also seen a bunch of comedians like Dave Chappelle and Ricky Gervais just stop caring. Dave Chappelle recently had this really funny response to a question about being offensive, and he said, yada, 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 everything I'm supposed to say, made a fart noise. He just didn't care. So what happens when Saturday Night Live is finally on the other side of that fire saying, you know what? We know you're offended. Don't care. We're going to make an even more offensive joke this week. It says to me that I really do think that Obama and other instances are signaling the end of woke outrage. Now listen, there are a lot of ways to implement true social justice without being an authoritarian. And this is people pushing back on authoritarianism. So today, I want to take a look at these stories about Michael Che so we can get some context about what these jokes are. But I must stress, it seems like this correlates with the demise of woke digital media. And there's some stories here that I think are really interesting. Notably, Mark Cuban wants some kind of regulation for media, which I don't think will work. And I want to give you examples about how woke outrage was weaponized by digital media to push lies and smear people for political reasons, and how all of this, it signifies the end, at least I hope. We'll get started here with this first story so you can understand the context about Michael Che being under fire for calling Caitlyn Jenner a fella. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's a PayPal option, a crypto option, a physical address. Of course, the best thing you can do is share this video because you know what? Despite my better instincts, I decided to do a video talking about very offensive concepts, even though I know YouTube might derank, demonetize, and it's a risk. But I feel like it's not just these stories about Michael Che, okay? I got another story about a UK comedian and even Ricky Gervais making some of the most outrageous and offensive bits of comedy, which to me says, I think now we are on the other side of that hill. That we're now, it's now understood. The context of the joke and the comments matter. While we're still not out of the woods completely, like I could get this channel could get me banned, right? It's hard to talk about. But when we're seeing all of these mainstream personalities, comedians, politicians now saying enough, I think they're losing their power. And this is the perfect example. Michael Che, he said, Michael Che called Caitlyn Jenner a fella and referred to her as former name during a live broadcast. But that was the point of the joke. He was saying that Kanye West is basically becoming Kathy because now he used to be this cool hip hop dude. Now he's this religious, guy wearing sweatpants. And he's saying he's going to turn to Kathy, and then he makes that joke. So anyway, before I move on, sharing the video helps because there is still risk, but we still have this good news. If in the event YouTube decides to derank and demonetize, you sharing overcomes that. Let's read the story now and get into the meat and the potatoes. They say Michael Che is in hot water. Is he? After making a crack about Caitlyn Jenner that many fans deemed transphobic. During the Weekend Update segment of Saturday's night show, Che joked about Kanye West's new religious public persona by comparing him to Jenner, joking that the rapper is turning into an old white lady. He said, at first I thought Kanye was losing his mind. And now I feel like he's fine. He's just turning into an old white lady. I mean, he used to be one of the coolest black dudes on earth. Now he's showing up to events in sweatpants and orthopedic sneakers, listening to Kenny G and trying to get black people to like Trump. It's like, how long before this guy changes his name to Kathy? He then goes on to say, it might sound crazy, but there used to be a fella named Bruce Jenner, making the point that Bruce Jenner is also a Trump supporter and then transitioned, and that's the joke he's making. Now, Many people felt that joke was transphobic, and thus Michael Che is in hot water. Did Michael Che apologize? Did Saturday Night Live do anything? They surprisingly, no. They did nothing. Not only that, they doubled down. Saturday Night Live star Michael Che ripped by viewers for second week as he's labeled ageist, sexist, and worse, not even slightly funny. Now, I'm going to have to admit, I can't even read these jokes that were on Saturday Night Live, and I'm probably going to have to blur part of the screen because the Daily Mail gets me in trouble on YouTube. But essentially, he made jokes about a 67-year-old Chinese woman who recently gave birth. And what was so remarkable about this is a few things. He's just coming off of a week of woke outrage. And not only did it not stop him, he's doubling down. But more importantly, the joke itself is based upon the fact that NBC told him you can't say these things on TV, and then he says them anyway. Taking this at face value, you might think he's really breaking script. He's really getting off of the cue cards and teleprompter and just telling people what really happened. No, I don't think that's true. I think that was the bit. It was part of the bit that he was saying he wasn't allowed to tell the jokes, and it allowed him to make several more offensive jokes. And it also does something interesting, whether it was intentional or not. It allows NBC and SNL to say, hey man, he went off script. Look what he did. We said we didn't want him to do it. Oh no, it wasn't us. I think it was part of the script so that they could tell those jokes. And that's, to me, another signal that this woke outrage losing its power. But I got a couple more stories for you. All of this is sort of happening around the exact same time. Look at this. This story's from today. Jason Manford. Cultural appropriation is a load of bollocks. This is a comedian in the UK who was complaining. They say Molly Hay Hogg slammed for cultural appropriation after Cleopatra costume. And he said, what a load of bollocks. They actually blur that word. I think I'm allowed to say it. I don't know. I always feel like quite a lefty liberal until I read about cultural appropriation. What a wokey term. Why don't we can it? Cultural appreciation. Ah, I see. And we be friends again. Waits to be accused of white mansplaining. Here's another comedian in the UK saying, seriously? And this is where it gets kind of funny. They say a follower opined that it was disrespectful to wear another culture as a costume, as they tweeted. Culture is important and shouldn't be used as a costume. The same way I wouldn't dress up as a Native American, it's disrespectful. I think there's other ways to appreciate culture. To which the comedian responded, well, if any ancient Egyptians want to complain, send them my way. Cleopatra could hardly be described as a poor minority. She was the leader of the most powerful culture on earth at the time. And they mention this comes after comments from Barack Obama challenging woke culture and the practice of taking people to task on the internet last week. Here we have two big moments recently where comedians said, don't care, get angry, you can't do nothing about it. What's interesting about the SNL incident is that it was not that long ago that Shane Gillis was fired from his job. So if you don't know the story, Shane Gillis was a new hire for SNL. I guess he was going to be a featured player. They fired him because he made offensive comments about Asians. How long has it been? A couple months? And Michael Che has now doubled down after being attacked for being offensive. A week later, makes offensive jokes about a 67-year-old Chinese woman. Is SNL going to fire him? Man, I'd be surprised if they did. He kind of went off the rails. So I'll put it this way. Him doubling down may not mean victory for him in the long run, but it is showing that mainstream personalities, this guy Jason Manford, Michael Che, are saying, nah, don't care, get angry, I'm not going to stop. That says to me that the woke outrage cancel culture stuff is routed and on the defensive and failing. And now here's the big one. The big one that's going to get me in trouble was Ricky Gervais. They say Ricky Gervais gets huge backlash after saying he'd dress up as trans women for Halloween, but specifically Jessica Yaniv. Jessica Yaniv is a very, very, very controversial trans person that has been heavily criticized by the trans community because Yaniv was trying to get Brazilian wax companies, like individuals, to do work on Yaniv's privates. The issue here is that Yaniv is a male, trans, but male. And recently, Yaniv lost the lawsuits. Basically, Yaniv was making phone calls to these different waxing, businesses, which was typically just one woman, and saying, I want a waxing service. As soon as they found out Yaniv was male, they said, I can't do that for a variety of reasons. So Yaniv, being in Canada, filed a human rights complaint against these salons. Ultimately, some of them, I believe some of them settled and had to pay Yaniv, but when it came to the actual suit, a judge was like, nah, you can't do this. Yaniv loses. Well, Ricky Gervais is out of F's to give. And so he tweeted that for Halloween, he was going as this individual who he called weird and creepy. Here's the interesting thing. The story's actually wrong. It says Ricky Gervais gets huge backlash after saying he dressed up as a trans woman for Halloween. That's not true at all. Absolutely not true. There was no huge backlash. Ricky Gervais made the joke. No one said a thing. Now, there were some people, sure. But in all these stories where they claim that there's a backlash to Ricky's joke, there's no real comments from anybody. Maybe a passive tweet here or there. The thing is, Yaniv is weird and creepy to many people and not representative of the trans community. And even trans activists were saying Yaniv is not a good person. In which case, the left doesn't want to get behind this individual. And Ricky Gervais wasn't saying he dressed up as a trans woman. He was talking about dressing up literally as a specific individual. But this to me was the most egregious in terms of sticking it to woke outrage. And it's because of the rules of social media. Twitter absolutely has a rule saying you can't misgender or disparage the trans community. Ricky Gervais tweeted this. Didn't care. Now, I think it's fair to point out, Ricky Gervais being an extremely famous personality, he's probably got some level of protection to him. However, and I will say this too, it's his own personal Twitter account, so it's different from working for a company. And that's where I think things are interesting. I'm not familiar with who this Jason Manford guy is, right? He's saying it's bollocks or whatever. I wonder if they're going to get mad at me for saying that word because it's not really an American word. We'll see what happens. But is that a swear? They blurred it on Yahoo News, on UK. I don't know, whatever. I'm not really familiar with him. But him and Ricky, they made these statements on their own Twitter accounts, okay, about pushing back on the woke outrage, saying, yes, so what? That I can get, because what company is going to be like, well, the comments were made on their own Twitter accounts, they can apologize for them, right? They're not going to, it's possible you get fired because you made a tweet for sure, but it's much different when you're on Saturday Night Live, you're actually a host on the show, and you use the show to push these comments, especially a week after you were already slammed. Maybe I'm wrong, but I kind of feel like this is a sign that whatever that woke outrage wave was, we're on the back end of it. You know, it started just before the 2010s with the rise of social media, but now these companies are all dying. And this is where I think the most important play comes in. Why now are these individuals allowed to be offensive without fear? Over time, there have been a series of comedians and high-profile personalities who've made it safe. It started probably with Jerry Seinfeld, then we get, Joe Rogan, then Ricky Gervais, now Michael Che, Dave Chappelle, etc. All these comedians are coming out and saying, I can be offensive, chill out, you can't do anything, I don't care. And because of this, people start feeling like, okay, if they can do it, so can I. It's acceptable. Obama does it. But I wonder then, why is it that these comedians started coming out? Is it because they finally snapped? Perhaps. But still, you'd imagine the woke outrage mobs would be able to leverage some kind of boycott or something against these personalities. I think there's one simple reason for it. And I did highlight this before, but there's some developments. It's because the digital media that normally pushes the narrative and amplifies the voices of the fringe minority is dying. So you'll get one or two people on Twitter, like this story, check this out. Ricky Gervais faces a backlash, but he didn't. What they'll do is they'll take one or two tweets, they'll make it a news story, and then everyone will think something bad actually happened, and marketing companies and brands will get scared, and they'll back away. But without the woke digital outrage, as these companies collapse, there's nobody to amplify the message anymore. And you know what's even crazier? The Daily Wire is doing really, really well. So is my channel. And we're channels that tell other people, chill out, it's a joke. If these are the channels that are growing, and the other digital media platforms that are angry all the time are shrinking, it's no surprise we are seeing comedians get offensive and double down. What you're seeing right now on the screen is Deadspin.com. I've talked about it quite a bit. This is a site that produces sports, and the new owners told the writers to just write about sports, but they didn't. They wanted to write about politics and woke outrage, among other things. And they all quit. Guess what? They just published this story a few minutes ago. They published this one today. They have replaced them, seemingly with no problem, and they just don't put a byline anymore. Guess what? The woke outrage is losing. These journalists who are all rallying around each other going like, oh no, they're trying to stop us from writing about politics. Yep. They bought your company, you quit, you're gone, and they replaced you in 2 seconds, and guess what the lead stories are? Football, football, football. Well, and boxing, MMA. Yeah, you're gone. The woke outrage isn't on this Deadspin. They're the ones who wrote about Gamergate. And now they have no more woke writers. It's like this weird era of insane ideology is slowly being erased now. And the other thing, too, is apparently they're going to be deleting a ton of archives from the whole Gawker network. I don't know the full details, but there are user pages that hold a lot of individual stories. They're being deleted. They're being wiped out apparently soon. The people who bought this they're purging it. I have to say, man, this looks like we're going downhill, right? So there was an uphill battle where everything was offensive and these people had tremendous power. We reached that peak and now we're about to go down like the roller coaster. It's about to start speeding up. With the collapse of these media companies, with more comedians coming out saying enough, you're going to see a wave of people saying, oh, I don't care. And I got to say, it's a really, really good thing for Democrats because they've been trapped by this. But here's what I want to do with the last couple of minutes in today's main segment. You see, Mark Cuban grilled over proposed regulation of news media. I think his heart's in the right place. Basically, I think they have the tweet here. Let me see if I can pull up his tweet. He said, any politician that says they will push for a law that says no TV or streaming network can brand, market, or name themselves a news network unless the 6 most viewed hours every night is 80% fact-checked news and opinion is clearly labeled as opinion only gets my vote. In my opinion, it would reduce the partisanship in this country almost overnight. Incorrect. Wrong. Your heart's in the right place, Mark, but you are wrong, okay? I think it's a good start, and I respect you for it. Please don't stop with the ideas. I in no way want this critique to dissuade anybody from talking about how we solve the partisanship problem and the fake news problem, but this ain't it. So I think this is relevant because it's probably in response to all of this fake news of which Mark has actually been a victim of. It was only a few years ago that Mark Cuban was taken out of context and he said, people are taking me out of context. I'm just trying to, tell it like it is. And he stood by his words. I think because we've all seen this, he was accused of being a racist and he was like, what? That's ridiculous. He now wants fact-based news. But let me tell you the problem, Mark, why this won't work. See, not too long ago, it was reported that you were chatty with Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon, who referred to Breitbart as a website for the alt-right. Now, I understand there's a lot of nuance and context in here. And then we also have this story where Mark Cuban said, I stand by my words relating to Trayvon Martin. The headline then becomes, Mark Cuban, comma, known to associate with the alt-right, comma, stands by offensive comments he made racially stereotyping an individual. Fact checkers would say that's true. And they would break it down and say the article was in reference to Mark Cuban saying I stand by my words when people were offended. And they would say Mark Cuban is also known with, of being chatty with Steve Bannon. The problem is not fact checking. The problem is that these people weaponized misleading and misleading information and technicalities to push a narrative and change what people think. I'll give you a really, an even simpler example is if I said something like Mark Cuban is a Cuban. That's a factual statement. Any fact checker would say Mark Cuban is in fact a Cuban. I'm not referring to the country of Cuba and saying he comes from there. No, my understanding is that he's Jewish and he grew up in Texas. But the point is, he is a Cuban like I am a pool, right? His family are the Cubans, therefore he is a Cuban. But what does it really mean? It's technically the truth. These journalists would use this kind of misleading language to smear people, and fact-checking doesn't do anything about it. The problem of partisanship isn't necessarily coming from these companies. It's a product of the culture war, as much as it's a whirlpool, man. This is why I describe it as a maelstrom, because they write the fake news, people believe the fake news, and then the fake news persists. So I'll end with one final thought, and I'll tie this all together for you. Here's a story from the New York Times. Those people we tried to cancel, they're all hanging out together. Depriving people of a platform works in unexpected ways. I'm not going to read this story. I'm just going to let you know it's ridiculously wrong. It talks about Dave Rubin, Bridget Fetisi, and other individuals who have never been canceled, but they say we're canceled. They don't understand what cancel culture is. So now we can tie this all together. You see, Saturday Night Live just doubled down. Will Michael Che be canceled? I honestly don't know. I don't know. He's been controversial before. But We'll see. But now you've got this Jason, what's this guy? Jason Manford, was that his name? I didn't even know. Jason Manford and Ricky Gervais not caring. And we're watching the media crumble. The answer, I will tell you, is not creating some kind of ombudsman or regulation system for news media, because even the New York Times doesn't know what it means to be canceled. Is that factually true? No, this is fake news. This story is ridiculously incorrect. Context matters. And I think, Mark, your idea about regulating the media doesn't work. We have cultural problems, and that's why it's called the culture war. But perhaps we're now coming out on the other side of that fire. I don't know for sure. Let me know what you think. It's just another story in this line of stories. Comment below. The next segment will be coming up at youtube.com/TimCastNews at 6 p.m. Thanks for hanging out. I will see you all next time.